Welcome back to Presidents in Politics. I am one of your hosts, Professor Caleb McGee, joined by my fellow co-host, former Congressman Ross.
Good morning.
And today we're going to talk about the 25th President, William McKinley.
Fascinating man. Very fascinating man.
Good guy, too.
You know, it was interesting, too, because he's probably, enters in this new 20th century attitude about international relations and tariffs. It consumes his career, but a really good man.
He was. I mean, again, you and I, throughout the theme of this podcast, a lot about goodness and greatness, he was a good man, and he was somewhat great. Now, obviously, his predecessor will be much greater than him, but he was a good guy, and he was fearless in battle.
He was, yes. In fact, I think he was in the battle of as a private or something in the Battle of Antietam.
He was in the Battle of Antietam,
and had his horse shot out from under him and limped back to the Union lines.
Yes, he'll voluntarily join the Civil War, of course, for the Union side. He'll go in as a private, and when he leaves, he's a major.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, in modern day military terms, can you imagine? First of all, it doesn't happen, but can you imagine in one conflict you go from private to major? Unheard of, but just a remarkable figure. And while he's in the Civil War, he befriends Hayes.
Yeah, Colonel Rutherford B. Hayes.
Rutherford B. Hayes. And Hayes said this of him. I don't have my reading glasses, so I'll try to. I had to write large. When battles were fought, or service was to be performed in warlike things, he always filled his place.
I firmly believe, and reading about him, he was a fascinating man. And he wasn't afraid to admit that he might have been wrong, too.
That's right.
When we talk about the tariffs aspect of this, because here he is, he comes back from the Civil War, he goes and learns how to practice law, passes the bar, marries Ida, who unfortunately has some serious health issues.
Yes, both physical and mental.
Yes,
which usually go hand in hand.
But he becomes her caregiver early on in their marriage and throughout his entire political career.
I think they said they had 4 happy years together when it was all said and done. And what's amazing, which you know this from all the state dinners that you've been at, but what's amazing, of course, it's customary that when the president has a state dinner, the president sits at one end and the first lady sits at the other end, and then of course they fill in with dignitaries throughout. He refused to do that because his wife was so ill that when she could attend state dinners, he wanted her at his right hand where he could watch out for her and make sure she was okay. And his staff was even like, "We don't do that." And he's like, "I don't care. I'm going to take care of my wife."
But
and I love that about him.
Well, you can't
What
fault
cool
a man
dude.
for that.
Like, he's basically like, I don't care who he tick off. My wife's going to sit next to me and I'm going to watch out for her because she needs that.
Yeah.
Like, that's a good guy.
And in fact, his wife's father, I guess, was a banker that he started doing some work for as a lawyer and really endeared himself to the banking industry, finds himself in state politics. Next thing you know, he's in Congress and he battles. You know, he's from Ohio. He battles. He serves for 14 years, but he is not reelected twice during his time in Congress. But he does serve a total of 14 years, and he becomes quite the the protectionist.
Very much so.
Of the American worker, and he is the author of the McKinley Tariff Act, which I don't think he regrets later on, but I think he's opened up to now realize during his presidency that we can't be isolationists when it comes to economics.
No.
It just doesn't work.
We talked about this last week
did.
on the podcast. You spent a good amount of time with this idea of political economy, if you will,
right? And
the idea of free trade versus the idea of protectionism, and the pros and cons of both. And you understand the heart of both, right? Like, you understand protection. You want to take care of the American jobs, and I'm all for that. We're all for that. But at the same time, as we have both said, which I mean Freeman said it first, self-sufficiency is inefficiency, right?
Yes.
We have to trade. I mean, we have to trade, but how do we trade in an ethical manner
and balanced?
And balance. How do we trade that we take care of American jobs and we're not exploiting individuals overseas that are working slave labor or farly underfunded labor? It's a type wire act, and McKinley attempts this. And it doesn't always work. I remember, who was it so long ago who made a statement that if you want to see a politician look like a fool, ask him about medical care in the Middle East. And you know that's true. Well, in the same way, if you want to see in this time period a politician look like a fool, ask him about trade.
Yeah.
Because I think in this time period, more guys got more derailed in their political careers in trade than almost anything else.
And again, you're seeing more of a global economy than we've ever seen before happening during the McKinley era. You're seeing, the gold standard being attacked, and that's how he wins his first term as a president. But I think a lot of people don't understand economics. That's right. Still don't today.
Well, that's true.
But he's thinking, what I'm going to do is protect the American worker. We're going to put high tariffs that we are not going to allow imports to come in here and take away American jobs, and therefore. But unfortunately, when you do that in the long run, even sometimes in the short run, it creates a very recessionary period where people there's no competition, and your economy starts to stall. And I think he realized that as president.
I like what you said, this idea that a lot of people don't understand economics. Economics is one of those sciences where it is an art and a science. I remember I had a professor one time when I was an undergrad, and he said that philosophy was teaching you things you didn't understand and making you feel guilty about it. Yeah. And there's some truth in that, and in some ways, that's economics. Economics is the philosophy of the mathematical field, right? It really is, because it's so unique, and there's so many intangibles that cannot be calculated. There's so many different little
so much
variables.
Can be promised, though.
Absolutely.
So much can be promised without any evidence of proof.
Yes.
Remember the Clinton campaign in 1992, it's the economy, stupid. And people say, well, yeah, it's the economy. I want more money. I want a better job. I want a better quality of life. And if you can run on the economy, especially when the economy is down,
yes,
you don't need much proof. All you need is hope.
And what you said is so true. For the average American, the term economy just simply means, do I have more money in my bank account and are groceries cheap?
Yes.
That's all economy means.
It doesn't mean how do you achieve it?
Exactly.
We can't produce everything here, so we got to have trade. But what does that mean? What does trade mean?
Exactly. And the average American doesn't really care about a balanced trade route either. Do I have a lot of money in my checking and savings account and are groceries cheap?
Yeah.
And if you accomplish that, then they go, well, they're brilliant with the economy. Might not be brilliant with the economy. It might just be a good wave.
Well, you're right. And we talked about this in class too. All of a sudden we have cheap goods that we can buy, but we have no jobs to support wages that can go buy these goods. So that's why the balance of trade is so important.
Exactly.
And I think McKinley realized that because he gets in to become president, and then he realizes, we've got to do something about trade. We've got to reduce tariffs. We've got to do better. We've got to be more interdependent in a global sense when it comes to trade.
What you said is true, though. At this time period, if we just look at the world history, because history doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? If we look at this idea of history is becoming much more globalized at this time period. I mean,
the Industrial Revolution.
Absolutely. And McKinley, right after this, of course, his second VP will be Teddy Roosevelt. We can't wait to get to. And what is one of the first initiatives Teddy Roosevelt does is the Panama Canal, which had already been tried before. The French had been trying it for a while. The French could not figure out how to get this done because there's constantly civil war. All their workers are getting malaria. They don't know what to do. So finally, the French give up on it. And then Teddy Roosevelt's like, we need a canal that we can actually trade around the world that will cut.
Because he sees trade.
Because he sees trade. The global impact. So it's not like it's just our idea. The French are already trying it. We're trying it. Like the whole world as a whole is coming together and going, okay, we need global trade, which we have today at
amazing
magnitude. I think in our class, you even showed the idea of where ships are.
Yeah, the maritime app. Yeah. It shows all these ships, thousands
it looks like the stars in space, right?
It does.
And this is what we are so interdependent on. If we were to close down, if every country were to close down their borders and say we're going to do just what we can manufacture, economies would plummet.
They would collapse.
Your grocery stores would be pretty darn empty, except for what, regional things?
Regional
in the South,
and seasonal.
We eat corn and pork.
Yeah,
and beef.
Yeah,
I would say citrus, but that's not really working out too well for us as Floridians.
Not at all, unfortunately.
But nonetheless, you'd have this idea of very small, expensive regional economies.
Yes.
And who knows how long they would even be sustainable anyway.
Probably not long, not with natural disasters the way they are. I mean, we've got to have global trade. That's just fundamental to our sustainability and our growth.
And especially if you look at the idea of population as well. Even look at America, look at Florida and our population, and look at a state like Wyoming. I mean, Wyoming has half of what Polk County has, right? Yeah. Like, they have enough land and resources. They could probably feed their, 500,000 people. Mm-hmm. How is Florida going to feed our
22 million?
22 million individuals.
Yeah.
Right? So then you can imagine what local economies would begin to look like. So not only is there this idea, we understand from a local level, some of my students, it's like the interstate system, and we understand trade and commerce between states.
Right.
It's the same concept on a global level. The only difference is we're not all working with the same rules. And that's where things start getting really weird.
Exactly. We don't have the same regulations. We don't have the same labor laws.
Exactly.
There's environmental concerns. There's all different types of concerns. And that's where the consumer has to be a little bit smarter about where they're buying from and when they exercise the power of their dollar.
Exactly.
And I think McKinley understood that. And McKinley was a fascinating man in that he also was let's talk about how he got elected.
Yes.
William Jennings Bryan comes across and says, what we're going to do is we don't need the gold standard. We need a mixed metallic. Mm-hmm. We need gold gold and silver and what that will do. And I read about this. Brian says if we use silver, that will inflate the dollar, which means that farmers can buy more. But inflation, you're really buying less with more money.
That's right.
And that's what was happening. And so here you have McKinley, who, front porch. He stays on his front porch, and people come to hear him speak. And he does his campaigning from the front porch, where William Jennings Bryan travels all over and loses big time twice to the same guy.
Yeah. And then, of course, for those who are a fan of history who are listening, Bryan will kind of go unheard of until, of course, the Scopes Monkey trial. And they find that he's kind of washed up at this point. I don't know how to say that. They pull him out of retirement. He's kind of washed up, and then they use him to prosecute, if you will, this school teacher from Dayton, Tennessee, who's trying to teach evolution in the classroom. And they get Bryan, and he's not as sharp as he once was, and he's not very sharp in the courtroom. So that's kind of the next time he'll, after being defeated twice for the White House,
and I think he's more known for that, the defense, I guess that was the prosecution. For that, and they were successful in the prosecution. Of course, ultimately it was overturned. But
it was, and he was only fined. I don't remember what it was now. It's been so long, $30 or something. I mean, it was ridiculous. But yeah, so interesting, like you said, running opponent. That kind of plays out. One of the things I thought about with history is McKinley, obviously, his second VP will be Teddy Roosevelt. And there are a few presidents who are ever known like Teddy Roosevelt. We can't wait to get to him. But I thought about this. I'm waxing a little philosophical here. Not everyone can be a Teddy Roosevelt, but you might be a McKinley. Not everyone can be a McKinley, but you might be a Hayes. And not everyone can be a Hayes, but you might be Hayes' single mom who raised him. Like, you stop and think about this, like this chain that goes throughout history, and you may never be the Teddy Roosevelt who changes the world, who everyone knows as a household picture, right? But you could be that one school teacher, or that one single mom, or that one father who was influential in that unbroken chain of success. And I just thought a lot about that, because there would have never been a Teddy Roosevelt without William McKinley.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about Garrett Hobart.
The first VP.
The first VP.
Who dies in office.
Who dies of heart disease in office. But Garrett was so well-liked, so sought out by cabinet members, by McKinley for advice and counsel. And he's doing but then he suffers and dies in the latter year of the first term of McKinley. And so what does McKinley do? He goes and gets Teddy Roosevelt, who I believe is governor of New York at the time. Now, this has happened in history before, but it happened after. Gerald Ford became vice president by appointment and then became president by succession to Richard Nixon, who resigned. That's essentially what happened here. Had it not been for Garrett Hobart dying in office, we wouldn't have Teddy Roosevelt.
That's a perfect way of looking at that.
And suddenly, here's a guy who becomes president who never ran for vice president, who never ran for president.
No.
Amazing.
Yes. I love that you bring that out, because that's what I love about history, is the ripple effect. And as you would say, you and I see this both as people of faith, is the providential hand of God. Tiny little acts that seem so insignificant.
When you think that I'm over, I'm washed up, suddenly, boom, you're back in the game. By whatever act, that may occur. But and that's Teddy Roosevelt that we're going to get into. But
and again, as we're kind of tying this all together, William McKinley will start something. Well, I guess he'll finally acquiesce to the Spanish-American War.
Yes, he doesn't. Because he doesn't want to do that.
No, he doesn't.
He's anti-imperialism.
Yes, he is.
And he doesn't we can't have this. But he's the first one to use the press to his advantage, because he realizes that the Hearst machine and Pulitzer are out there with yellow journalism
and muckraking journalism, which is so important this time.
And inspiring this fear in the Americans. About Spain and
coming through Cuba up through Florida. Which, have we heard that multiple times throughout history?
Continue.
Yeah, I mean,
continue to hear it.
Over 90 and over.
miles off the coast.
Come on. When you're in Key West, you're closer to Cuba than you are to Florida. If you're Floridian, how many times have you heard that growing up, right? Like, there's always been this perpetual fear that Cuba is going to be the launching ground for a foreign power, which, that's completely unfounded.
Let's talk about that, because they have the Spanish-American War, which only lasts 100 days.
The Splendid Little War.
The Splendid Little War. Yes. Oh, if there should ever be such a thing.
Right, it's kind of, yes.
But in doing that, America takes Philippines, they take Guam, they take Puerto Rico, and they take Cuba. And then they go to vote to annex all these, and they end up annexing everything but Cuba.
Yes.
and Cuba gets their independence. What if we had annexed Cuba?
We went through this with my classes we were just in. We talked about this idea of it's such a sticky situation, right? Anti-imperialism, as McKinley was.
Right.
You don't want the old roots of colonialism, but look at what Cuba has gone through with the communist regimes and through Castro and through all the issues and all the human rights violations and the amount of individuals who have fled that to come into Florida and other places. Right. And had that been annexed, would it have been another Puerto Rico? Which I know there's a lot of complaints there, but the protection, the security, the wealth that America brings,
Puerto Rico is significantly better than Cuba.
No matter what an individual wants to argue, right? And there's so many arguments about that, but I can assure you that a Cuban refugee and an individual in Puerto Rico, if you want to look at the quality of life, is vastly different.
Oh yeah.
And I know what we're saying is probably politically controversial, honestly, but I mean, it's what we do, isn't it? But if you were to look at, I love this. Hypothetically, had Cuba been annexed as well and it became an American territory, what would it look like today?
You're right. It would be a vacation kingdom, I would imagine, and probably a major producer of certain agricultural products, including sugarcane.
Is that what you were thinking?
Tobacco, yes.
You were thinking sugarcane?
And tobacco,
okay.
Yes.
But yes, like if you stop and think about this, and this war, if we're like Teddy Roosevelt, McKinley, how they're so interlinked, this war makes Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh gosh, yes.
This is what makes Teddy Roosevelt. Because I'm sure you know this, but I don't know if our listeners do. Teddy Roosevelt, when this war breaks out, was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Yes.
Cushy civilian job that pays well with a fancy office. Yeah, bully, right? You couldn't beat it. Done. He leaves and voluntarily forms the Rough Riders.
Yeah.
And then he's smart enough that he brings a guy, Richard Harding Davis, along with him, who's a media correspondent, and he publishes all of his war exploits along the way. So when he comes home, now he's a war hero.
Yes.
So now McKinley's like, I could use that guy for my VP, right? And so the whole thing's interconnected. So like McKinley finally acquiesced to the war, and the war builds the guy that he's going to bring on as his VP, and then he's assassinated. So like they're just interlinked. You can't talk about McKinley and not talk about Roosevelt, and you can't talk about Roosevelt and not talk about McKinley.
Because, I mean, McKinley essentially not only discovered, but through his actions with the Spanish-American War, made Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah. Roosevelt becomes this war. Now remember, at this time period, who's voting? Men.
Yeah.
Just men. So you're playing just to the populace, and then especially this time period of that rugged individual. And who is Roosevelt?
Oh.
Cowboy, hunter.
Yeah.
Explorer. Police
Fearless.
Commissioner, soldier. I mean, Davis would write in his journal when Roosevelt was riding up San Juan Hills Charge that a Spanish soldier jumps on Roosevelt's horse and Roosevelt breaks the guy's neck with his bare hands and rolls him off the horse, right? And this is Roosevelt. So obviously when he comes, he's like the Chuck Norris of the day. Every man around's like, we're going to vote for that guy. Yeah. So McKinley makes Roosevelt, and then McKinley pushes him on the national stage. Like you could not have had. But again, who makes McKinley but Hayes?
You're right.
You just see these.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Interconnected little pieces.
McKinley's elected to Congress the same year Hayes is elected president of the United States.
Yes.
And of course McKinley serves under Colonel Hayes in the Civil War.
And McKinley even pauses his last month or two of running for the House, his campaigning in order to campaign for Hayes because there's such a good friendship. And Hayes remembers that. There's like this constant little back and forth of all these interconnected webs. We wouldn't have, and you just have to see the providential hand of God, just moving in all these little things. Yes,
maybe we are. We're just not recognizing it.
You know, I remember I had a professor one time, and he said he was talking to one of his colleagues, and he said, you know, where are the greats? Where are the Roosevelts? Where are the others? And he said, you don't see them because you're walking among them.
Wow. There's probably a lot of truth to that.
Who knows who the next Roosevelt is, who the McKinley working with them. We're rubbing shoulders with them. History might bear them out 50 years from now. But we need to find them while we're rubbing shoulders with them.
Yes, sooner than when you can imagine.
We need them very, very greatly.
So he wins his second election.
Yes.
And he goes to the, Pan American Exposition in
Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
Nothing good comes out of Buffalo, right?
Oh.
September 6, 1901. Temple of Music, which was a famous building that John Philip Sousa, we keep coming back to him, would often perform in. And it doesn't go well for him.
No, I can't say the guy's last name.
Szelgosz.
Szelgosz.
Because it's Polish.
Yeah, he's an American Polish
yes.
Who was an anarchist. He did not.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, he believed in anarchy. I think he was trained by some guy that went over to Italy and shot their president. Mm-hmm. So he felt it was his job to do it here. Mm-hmm. And but because of this, because of the death of McKinley, we see the Secret Service being created.
That's right.
You know, we see all of a sudden. I mean, it's the third presidential assassination in America's history. When are we going to learn? When are we going to do something about this?
We should probably protect this guy. There are crazy people out there.
Yes.
I remember my granddad with all the Okeechobee wisdom and colloquialisms. He used to always say, every bright light is going to attract a few bugs. And there's some truth in that. Think about like religion and politics. The crazies gravitate around that kind of stuff,
the truth?
Right?
Yeah.
And there's some serious truth in it. So we got to talk the history of the Secret Service. You brought this up. The Secret Service, as you well know, was not started as a protection detail. It was started to help fight counterfeit money. Lincoln, ironically, Lincoln starts it. He could have used it greatly, right? But Lincoln will start the Secret Service, and it's estimated, historians estimate that at that time period, because I mean, the Civil War, everything's going on, that 50% of the currency, the money that was in circulation, was counterfeit.
50%?
Up to 50% is what's speculated. So Lincoln is like, we cannot have a country running on half counterfeit money. So he forms the Secret Service, and their number one objective is to find counterfeit money and arrest, or probably in that time period, hang counterfeiters. We've got to get control of this, and that's their only job. And now, after this next assassination, third assassination, they start looking for federal agencies. Money's super tight. We got to figure out someone. Or the Secret Service only have one job. They just simply root out money. Money's getting better off. Let's give them the job of the protection of the presidency.
No kidding.
And they start protecting the president.
Wow.
So that's how it all shakes out.
Wow.
I mean, it's just such weird little things in history. If you ask the average person on the street, tell me the Secret Service, they picture the guy with the black suit, the dark sunglasses, the earwig, and they're, whatever. That's not how it started. The whole thing was to try to protect the economy. It comes back to the economy. It was to try to protect the economy because the economy was going to fall because it was running on counterfeit money.
Yep.
And then, ironically, Lincoln starts the Secret Service, and then finally now they start knowing their job as the protection detail.
Yes.
And they're very good at it.
Yeah, they were just a little late on this one.
A little late on this one.
But, Garfield the guy comes up to him, goes shake his hand, shoots twice. One goes off his button, the other one gets in his abdomen. And as I read, there was a doctor who started looking for 2 bullets, and it didn't wash up. That's right. And they thought that he was going to live. They figured, but 8 days later he dies of gangrene. He was in infection, and it's just a tragic ending.
It is, yeah. Leon Shelgosh, like you said, he's an anarchist. He uses a very small caliber weapon. It's a .32 caliber. I know you're familiar. You're a hunter. It's a very small caliber round. So he said the first round goes off the button, the second one embeds. So when the doctor's in there, McKinley's a big guy. He's like 200 pounds.
Yeah.
So the doctor's like, well, it's probably just lodged in the back muscle. He's got some thick back muscle. He'll be fine. We're going to just sew him up. And like you said, he ends up getting gangrene. So historians always wonder, was the bullet dirty?
Yeah, they thought it might have even been a poison bullet.
They thought it might have even tainted the bullet, which was an old technique, right? Even going way back with European wars, I mean, back to like the Prussian wars, they would, and the Civil War did this too, they would take their ball, the ball and musket, they would take their balls, and they would soak it like in dead animals and feces and urine, like a lot of bacteria get on it, and then they would shoot an individual with that, and it was biological warfare. It was a dirty bullet. Wow. So, is Shelgosh, did he do something like this? We don't know. History doesn't say. This is pure speculation. But the gangrene sets on so fast, and had it been lodged like in a back muscle, was it a dirty bullet? We don't know. No. It could have been. It could have been. But like you said, so he walks up, he acts like he's going to shake his hand, and then he has this small weapon, and it's wrapped in a white handkerchief, and he fires twice. And it's a very, very, very tragic ending to the life of McKinley. And what's interesting, I don't know if you've read this or not, but now Teddy Roosevelt, who's newly the VP, what has he been, less than a year as VP? Yeah, less than a year as VP. He's out camping. Yeah. And they can't find him. And they finally go find him in a campsite, and they basically swear him in like over a campfire and have to get him back to D.C. I mean, like, he doesn't have any security, any protection. He's just like, it's just Teddy Roosevelt like out in the woods, like smoking a cigar. And they go find like, hey, you're the president now. I said, no. And they're like, no, you're the president now. Stand up. We're going to swear you in.
Isn't that amazing?
That's just kind of classic Teddy Roosevelt, though.
It is.
That's where they have to then like get him back, and he's still like in his camping gear and probably hasn't showered yet. And now he's the acting president. They're like ushering him back to the White House really fast. Because he knew that McKinley got shot, but they tell him he's going to be fine.
Yeah, it was 8 days from the shooting.
So he's like, I'm going to go kind of de-stress some and go camping, and then he dies unexpectedly, and they have to go find Roosevelt. So, because again, the VP was kind of the most useless job.
Yeah, you're right. John Adams was right.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was. Now, we got to talk about his faith, though. He was a man of immense faith. He's a Methodist, devout. He was a Sunday school superintendent when he was young. His mom always wanted him to be a pastor.
Wow.
Yeah, he felt like he wasn't called that, but he loved the Lord. He said that he got saved at the age of 10 at a revival meeting, and it just changed his life forever.
I believe that.
I do too.
Yeah.
He was an abolitionist. He believed in the rights of individuals, the way he took care of his wife. I mean, like, his life reflected what he said he believed.
Yes.
He genuinely cared about people, and you see that throughout. It was said of him that he was one of the most friendly and just kind, compassionate presidents to work around. All of his staff said they just loved working around him because of just the man that he was. And I believe that was truly his faith.
I think so too.
When he was sworn in, when his inauguration, he actually kissed the Bible, and he placed his hand on the open passage from. I didn't write the reference down. Or did I write the first? I didn't write the reference down, but it's from the writings of Solomon when he became king, and this was the passage: "Give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people. For who can judge this thy people that is so great?"
Wow.
I like that.
I do too.
Because one of the things I've tried to do this in studies before is look at different passages that were open when presidents put their hand on them, and some of them are so meaningful, and some seem random. They must have some, like when Washington was sworn in, his was in Genesis over like Jacob, and it was like Jacob went in and came out, and you're like, what was that? Did the wind blow the page? was there a reason why you chose that? But here's McKinley, and like this is so intentional. You can tell. God, I want your wisdom and I want knowledge that I can lead these people in a way. And you see that.
Yeah, and I think he practiced. I think you hit it very well. He was intentional.
He was.
In so many ways. You know, he was very intentional on tariffs until he saw the damage it was doing, and then he became intentional against the tariffs.
Yes.
He was the same way about, protectionism, and then until he saw, that it's not helping us. And interesting guy that probably did more to lay the predicate for one of the greatest presidents we've ever had.
Totally agreed.
That we'll get into next time.
I don't believe you could have had a Teddy Roosevelt without a McKinley.
I agree with you.
It would have never happened. Like, he is the reason why. And again, that's why, to me, I always think that historically, you may not be the Teddy Roosevelt, but you could be the McKinley, or you could be the Hayes, or you could be Hayes' single mom that no one reads about, or you could be the school teacher that influenced. Like, you can be that one person in history that could,
plays that significant role.
That broken link could have changed all of history for generations to come. But you were that one little link that we don't read about, we don't talk about. We don't talk about Hayes' single mom who did something, but she started something that would change the shape of a country forever.
Yep.
And that's significant. We need to know that. I think sometimes, I truly believe that the greatest thing that an individual needs in life is purpose.
Amen. And if they understand that in the big picture of things, we all have a role to play.
Yes.
And that our purpose is not insignificant.
Yes.
Just to understand that you have to use your passion to pursue it.
Yes.
And
maybe that mom listening to us right now, that single mom at home, tired, kid's been screaming all night long, and she's like, what's my purpose? You never know what that kid could be, or what that kid could influence, what could become.
And I think that's the beauty of doing these podcasts over the presidents, because you realize that these are just ordinary people that have been given extraordinary opportunities.
Absolutely.
Because of the people that helped them get to where they are.
Absolutely.
And we don't read about them, but we're all blessed with those abilities.
Agreed. Yeah, when McKinley was shot, and then as he's going into surgery, his biographer said that his final words before being put to sleep was he was saying the Lord's Prayer quietly to himself. And I thought a lot about that. I think sometimes in moments of great tragedy, those very simple truths of faith come back to mind.
Well put.
Yeah, I've had a couple of health scares along my way, and I remember one of them laying in an ER and a doctor saying, like, this might be really, really bad. And I remember my mind going back to Psalm 23 and just remembering those words and just thinking sometimes those deepest, darkest moments, it's just those simple elements of faith. They're the only thing that bring comfort. And I think McKinley was the type of man that he was because of his faith. He was a man of faith.
He understood his mortality.
He did.
Yep.
And he understood his purpose.
Exactly. And the hereafter.
Yes. Yes. So William McKinley, he's not a Teddy Roosevelt, but he builds a Teddy Roosevelt.
Exactly. Without a McKinley, we would never have a Teddy Roosevelt.
What was it? Who was the old coach who said, if you can't be an athlete supporter? If you can't be a Teddy Roosevelt, be a Teddy Roosevelt supporter.
There you go.
So we'll come to him next week. Thank you very much.